Today, I will be presenting to you about LPG. LPG stands for Liberalization, Privatization and Globalization. Dear students, welcome to Swayambhu course Urban Local Governance. I am Dr. Vijayakumari Joseph, Associate Professor, Department of Commerce, Madras Christian College, Chennai. By the end of this video, you will be able to understand the background of the reform policies which was introduced in India in the year 1991. Know what liberalization, privatization and globalization is and learn the features, objectives and the advantages of liberalization, privatization and globalization. Be aware of the impact of the reform process in various sectors. Let us first look into the background of LPG. Since independence, India followed the mixed economy framework by combining the advantages of the capitalist economic system with those of the socialist economic system. This policy resulted in the establishment of a variety of rules and laws which were aimed at controlling and regulating the economy, ended up instead in hampering the process of growth and development. In 1991, India met with an economic crisis relating to its external debt. The government was not able to make repayment on its borrowings from abroad. For foreign exchange reserves, which we generally maintain to import petroleum and other important items, dropped to levels that were not sufficient for even a fortnight. The crisis was further compounded by rising prices of essential goods. All these led the government to introduce a new set of policy measures which changed the direction of our developmental strategies. The origin of the financial crisis can be traced from the inefficient management of the Indian economy in the 1980s. We know that for implementing various policies and its general administration, the government generates funds from various sources such as taxation, running of public sector enterprises, etc. When expenditure is more than income, the government borrows to finance the deficit from banks and also from people within the country and from international financial institutions. When we import goods like petroleum, we pay in dollars, which we earn from our exports. Development policies required that even though the government had to overshoot its revenue to meet challenges like unemployment, poverty, and population explosion, the continued spending on development programs of the government did not generate additional revenues. Moreover, the government was not able to generate sufficiently from internal sources such as taxation. When the government was spending a large share of its income and on areas which do not provide immediate returns, such as the social sector and defense, there was a need to utilize the rest of its revenues in a highly efficient manner. The income from public sector undertaking was also not very high to meet the growing expenditure. At times, our foreign exchange borrowed from other countries and international financial institutions was spent on meeting consumption needs. Neither was an attempt made to reduce such profligate spending, nor sufficient attention was given to boost exports to pay for the growing imports. In the late 1980s, government expenditure began to exceed its revenue by such large margins that meeting the expenditure through borrowings became unsustainable. Prices of many essential goods rose sharply. Imports grew at a very high rate without matching growth of exports. As pointed out earlier, foreign exchange reserves declined to a level that was not adequate to finance imports for more than 2 weeks. There was also not sufficient foreign exchange to pay the interest that needed to be paid to international lenders. Also, no country or international funder was willing to lend to India. India approached the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, popularly known as World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, IMF and received $7 billion as loan to manage the crisis. For availing the loan, these international agencies expected India to liberalize and open up the economy by removing restrictions on the private sector, reduce the role of the government in many areas, and remove trade restrictions between India and other countries. India agreed the conditions of World Bank and IMF and announced the new economic policy NEP. The NEP consisted of wide ranging economic reforms. The thrust of the policies and towards creating a more competitive environment in the economy and removing the barriers to entry and growth of firms. This set of policies can broadly be classified into two groups: the stabilization measures and the structural reform measures. Stabilization measures are short term measures intended to correct some of the weaknesses that have developed in the balance of payment and to bring inflation under control. In simple words, this means that there was a need to maintain sufficient foreign exchange reserves and keep the rising prices under control. On the other hand, structural reform policies are long term measures aimed at improving the efficiency of the economy and increasing its international competitiveness by removing the rigidness in various segments of the Indian economy. The government initiated a variety of policies which fall under three heads: liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Let us first learn about liberalization. Liberalization is the method or means of the elimination of control of the government over economic activities or policies. It means the process of opening up of the Indian economy to trade and investment with the rest of the world. It provides a greater autonomy to the business enterprises in decision making and eliminates government interference. Until the 1991, India had an import protection policy in which trade with the rest of the world was limited to exports. It means India could only export a good product but not import anything. Foreign investment was very difficult to come into India due to a bureaucratic framework. Liberalization was introduced to put an end to these restrictions and open various sectors of the economy. After the start of the economic liberalization, India started getting huge capital inflows and it has emerged as the second fastest growing country in the world. Some of the objectives of liberalization are to reduce the role of the public sector in future industrial development, to encourage the competition between domestic businesses, to refine the technology and foreign capital, could promote a global market, to reduce the debt burden, to unlock the economic potential of the country by boosting the multinational corporations and private sector to invest and expand, and lastly, to develop foreign trade and regulate imports and exports. Some important reforms are deregulation of industrial sector, financial sector reforms, tax reforms, foreign exchange reforms, trade and investment policy reforms. Deregulation of industrial sector. In India, regulatory mechanisms were enforced in various ways. First one is industrial licensing, under which every entrepreneur had to get permission from government officials to start a firm, close a firm, or decide the amount of goods that could be produced. The second point is private sector was not allowed in many industries. Third one, some goods could be produced only in small scale industries. And lastly, controls on price fixation and distribution of selected industrial products. The reform policy introduced in and after 1991 removed many of these restrictions. Industrial licensing was abolished for almost all but products categories: alcohol, cigarettes, chemicals, industrial explosives, electronics, aerospace, and drugs and pharmaceuticals. The only industry which was now reserved for the public sector are a part of atomic energy generation and some core activities in railway transport. Many goods produced by small scale industries have now been de-reserved. In most industries, the market has been allowed to determine the prices. Financial sector reforms. Financial sector includes financial institutions such as commercial banks, investment banks, stock exchange, operations, and foreign exchange market. The financial sector in India is regulated by the Reserve Bank of India (RBI). We may be aware that all banks and other financial institutions in India are regulated through various norms and regulations of the RBI. The RBI decides the amount of money that the banks can keep with themselves, fixes interest rates, nature of lending to various sectors, etc. The reform policies led to the establishment of private sector banks, India as well as foreign. Foreign investment limit in banks was raised to around 74%. Those banks which fulfill certain conditions have been given freedom to set up new branches without the approval of the RBI and rationalize their existing branch networks. Though banks have been given permission to generate resources from India and abroad, certain managerial aspects have been retained with the RBI to safeguard the interest of the account holders and the FII, such as merchant bankers, mutual funds, and pension funds, are now allowed to invest in Indian financial markets. Second one is the tax reforms. Tax reforms are concerned with the reform in the government's taxation and public expenditure policies, which are collectively known as its fiscal policy. There are two types of taxes: direct and indirect. Direct taxes consist of taxes on incomes of individuals as well as profits of business enterprises. Since 1991, there has been a continuous reduction in the taxes on individual incomes as it was felt that high rate of income tax were an important reason for tax evasion. It is now widely accepted that moderate rates of income tax encourages savings and voluntary disclosure of income. The rate of corporation tax, which was very high earlier, has been gradually reduced. Efforts have also been made to reform the indirect taxes levied on commodities, in order to facilitate the establishment of a common national market for goods and commodities. Next one is the foreign exchange reforms. The first important reform in the external sector was made in the foreign exchange market. In 1991, as an immediate measure to resolve the balance of payment crisis, the rupee was devaluated against foreign currencies. This led to an increase in the inflow of foreign exchange. It also set the tone to free the determination of rupee value in the foreign exchange market from government control. Now, more often than not, markets determine exchange rates based on the demand and supply of foreign exchange. The next reform would be the trade and investment policy reform. Liberalization of trade and investment regime was initiated to increase international competitiveness of industrial production and also foreign investments and technology into the economy. The aim was also to promote the efficiency of local industries and adoption of modern technologies. In order to protect domestic industries, India was following a regime of quantitative restrictions on imports. This was encouraged through tight control over imports and by keeping the tariffs very high. These policies reducing efficiency and competitiveness, which led to slow growth of the manufacturing sector. The trade policy reforms aimed at dismantling of quantitative restrictions on imports and exports, reduction of tariff rates, and also removal of licensing procedures for imports. Import licensing was abolished except in case of hazardous and environmentally sensitive industries. Quantitative restrictions on imports of manufactured consumer goods and agricultural products were also fully removed from April 2001. Export duties have been removed to increase the competitive position of Indian goods in the international markets. Advantages of liberalization. Economic liberalization has enabled the free flow of capital in our country. making it easier for companies to access capital from investors. Prior to liberalization, due to the lack of capital, it was reluctant to undertake profitable projects, but that changed in 1991, resulting in higher growth rates. After the liberalization of the financial system, investors have the opportunity to invest part of their portfolios in various asset classes, generating more income. Relaxation of economic laws will increase the value of the stock market and facilitate trading among investors. Although the impact of liberalization on the agriculture sector cannot be measured directly, there has been a significant increase in the period since 1991. Now that you have learned about liberalization, I have a question for you. What do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of liberalization? Let's now look into privatization. Privatization implies shedding of the ownership or management of a government owned enterprise. Government companies are converted into private companies in two ways: by withdrawal of the government from ownership and management of public sector companies, or by outright sale of public sector companies. Privatization of the public sector enterprises by selling off part of the equity of PSEs to the public is known as disinvestment. The purpose of the sale, according to the government, was mainly to improve financial discipline and facilitate modernization. That private capital and managerial capabilities could be effectively utilized to improve the performance of the PSUs. Privatization may imply several things, such as shift from the public sector to the private sector. It is also used as a metaphor for deregulation when heavily regulated private companies and industries are no longer organized. Government services and operations can also be privatized, denationalized in this context. The implementation of government plans or implementation of government subsidies once the vision of state owned enterprises has been entrusted to private companies. In some cases, it includes law enforcement, tax collection, and prison administration. Objectives of privatization: giving strong momentum to foreign direct investment inflows. Privatization aims to create a strong base for foreign direct investment inflows. Increased foreign direct investment inflows improve the financial strength of the economy. Improving public sector units efficiency. The PSU efficiency is improved by giving decision making autonomy. Some companies receive special categories of Navratna and Mini Ratna methods of privatization. As soon as the government decides to privatize a company, it looks for the best way. There are several ways to successfully privatize. The first one is asset disposal. Second, public offering. Third, infrastructure partnerships. 4, public auction. 5, right to purchase leases. 6, outsourcing. The advantages of privatization are improving performance and customer experience, non political interference, short term prospectus, encouraging shareholders to invest for a better return, increasing competition, government increasing revenue from sales. Before looking into globalization, I want to ask you another question on privatization. What are the factors causing privatization? The next one is the globalization. Globalization refers to the spread of the flow of financial products, goods, technology, information, and jobs across national borders and cultures. In economic terms, it describes an interdependence of nations around the globe fostered around free trade. Although globalization is generally understood to mean integration of the economy of the country with the world economy, it is a country with the world economy. It is a complex phenomenon. It is an outcome of the set of various policies that are aimed at transforming the world towards greater interdependence and integration. It involves creation of networks and activities transcending economic, social, and geographical boundaries. Globalization attempts to establish links in such a way that the happenings in India can be influenced by events happenings miles away. It is turning the world into one whole or creating a borderless world. Causes of globalization. While globalization is not caused by any single factor, technology remains a critical element. There is no doubt that the invention of the telegraph, the telephone, and the microchip in more recent times has revolutionized communication between different parts of the world. When printing initially came into being, it laid the basis for the creation of nationalism. So, also today, we should expect that technology will affect the way we think of our personal but also our collective lives. The ability of ideas, capital, commodities, and people to move more easily from one part of the world to another has been made possible largely by technological advances. The pace of these flows may vary. For instance, the movement of capital and commodities will most likely be quicker and wider than the movement of peoples across different parts of the world. Globalization, however, does not emerge merely because of the availability of improved communications. What is important is for people in different parts of the world to recognize these interconnections with the rest of the world. Currently, we are aware of the fact that events taking place in one part of the world could have an impact on another part of the world. The bird flu or tsunami is not confined to any particular nation. It does not respect national boundaries. Similarly, when major economic events take place, their impact is felt outside their immediate local, national, or regional environment at the global level. Advantages of globalization: more choices, higher value commodities, increased competition, economies of scale, increased capital inflows, increased labor mobility, improving international relations. I hope you would have learned about LPG. I want to close by giving you a homework. Identify a country where this LPG movement was practiced and compare it with India. Thank you.